If you've seen the Pixar movie Inside Out, and if you haven't, by the way, you should, you already understand more about how the human mind works than most introductory psychology textbooks teach. You remember the setup. There's a little girl named Riley, and inside her head, there's a control room. And in that control room, there are these characters: joy, sadness, fear, anger, disgust. Each of them is running the show at different times. Each one has its own personality. Each one thinks it's helping. And then in Inside Out 2, Riley's teenager now, and a whole new set of characters shows up: anxiety, envy, embarrassment. Anxiety, in particular, is just trying to keep Riley safe by running every possible disaster scenario in advance. Pixar didn't invent that. They just animated something psychologists, philosophers, and contemplatives have been describing for over 100 years. Today, we're going to talk about why that intuition is right, why you're not actually one person trying to change, you're a system of parts, and they don't always agree. And once you understand that, the gap between knowing and doing, the thing we talked about last week, starts to make a lot more sense. So in our last episode of MetaTherapy, we talked about the insight behavior gap. Today is the first big reason that gap exists. You've been trying to change it as if you were one person, and you're not. So let's start here. The idea that you're a self, singular, unified, one thing, is actually a very recent idea and kind of a weird one. If you turn your attention inward right now and just listen, there are voices in there. There is a voice that's curious about what I'm going to say next. There's probably a voice that's making a grocery list. There's maybe a voice that's wondering if it should keep watching this or check its phone. There's a voice that, depending on what kind of week you had, is being kinder or harder on you. That's not weird. That's not pathology. That is what minds do. William James, who founded American psychology in 1890, wrote about what he called the various selves, psychological roles that shift across relationships and contexts. He didn't see this as a problem. He saw it as the basic structure of being a person. So 20 years after James, an Italian psychiatrist named Roberto Assagioli, a contemporary of Freud and Jung, went further. He said the recognition of subpersonalities, as he called them, was not pathological at all. It was, in fact, normal. He said something like, we behave one way at work, another way at home, another with old friends, another in solitude. Different selves, us. And then there's a long lineage from there. Eric Berne and transactional analysis in the 1950s, the parent, the adult, and child, all of us still using that vocabulary now. Fritz Perls and Gestalt therapy in the 1960s with the empty chair, having different parts of yourself talk to each other. Voice dialogue, ego state therapy. And then in the 1990s, a family therapist named Richard Schwartz took all of that and gave it a particular clear, structured, teachable form. He called it internal family systems, IFS for short. And that's the model I want to actually walk you through today. And by the way, this isn't just a Western psychology idea. Buddhist psychology has been describing multiple minds for 2,500 years. Christian mystics described an interior castle with many rooms. Indigenous traditions across cultures have practiced soul retrieval, the idea that parts of us get fragmented by trauma and need to be brought back. The recognition that we are multiple is actually one of humanity's oldest psychological insights. So when Pixar makes a movie about little characters running a control room inside of Riley's head, they're not making it up. They're animating something humans have been describing for thousands of years. Okay, so here's the IFS map of the inner world. It's actually quite simple. There are two categories of parts, and then there's something called self. which is not a part. The first category are the protectors, and they come in two flavors. Managers are the proactive protectors. These are the parts running the day, trying to keep things from going wrong before they go wrong. The perfectionist part, the people-pleasing part, the don't put yourself out there part, the stay in control part, the intellectualizer, the part of you that processes everything by thinking about it, including possibly the part that's noticing this video is making you think. Anxiety in Inside Out 2 is essentially a manager. Her whole job is to run every possible bad scenario in advance and try to prevent them. Disgust in the original Inside Out is also a manager, like keeping Riley away from things deemed unacceptable. These are protective parts, working hard to keep things from going wrong. Firefighters are the reactive parts and protectors. These are what kicks in when managers fail and something painful breaks through. The part that grabs the phone, the part that pours the drink, the part that suddenly feels rage instead of hurt, the part that dissociates, the part that shops, scrolls, eats, withdraws, anything to make the pain stop right now. So anger is the clearest firefighter in the Inside Out movie. Explosive, reactive, designed to discharge intense feelings fast. Firefighters aren't bad. They show up in emergencies. The problem is when the system has set the threshold too low and they're running the show in situations that aren't actually emergencies. And here's the most important thing about protectors. They are not your enemy. Every protector, even the ones causing real problems in your life, is doing a job it took on, often very early. It learned at some point that this strategy kept you safe, and it's been doing that job loyally, sometimes for decades, sometimes since before you can remember. The part of you that won't let you see the boundary is not stupid. It's not weak. It is loyal. Your protective parts are not weak. They are loyal. They have been doing a job for a very long time. Insight alone is not going to fire them or get them to relax. So the next entity is what we call exiles. These are the parts the protectors are protecting. Exiles are the wounded younger parts, the parts that carry the original pain, shame, grief, terror, loneliness. The part that learned at 5 years old that needing things meant being a burden. The part that learned at 12 that being seen meant being mocked. The part that learned at 20 that getting close to someone meant getting hurt. They're called exiles because the system has pushed them down, locked them away, sent them somewhere they can't be felt. Because their pain felt unbearable, because there was no one at the time to help carry it. This is the deeper move Inside Out makes, and why the first movie is genuinely a masterclass in the IFS model. The whole arc of the film is Joy realizing that sadness, the part she's been keeping away from the controls, exiling, is actually carrying something the system desperately needs to feel. The healing happens when Joy stops protecting Riley from sadness and lets it be felt. That is almost exactly what unburdening an exile looks like in IFS. So here's the picture. Most adult life suffering in the IFS model is a protector trying to keep an exile offline. The perfectionism is keeping the not good enough part hidden. The withdrawal is keeping the abandonment part from being touched. The rage is keeping the helplessness part out of reach. And when the conscious mind says, I should stop doing this, you are speaking to one of the parts. While another part, the protector, is the one actually running the show. They are not the same. And then finally, there is the self, the capital S. Self is not another part. Self is what is and who you are underneath all of these parts. It's what's left when no part is currently driving. In IFS, self has 8 qualities. They are called the 8 C's: calm, curiosity, compassion, clarity, courage, creativity, connectedness, and confidence. And the wild thing, and this is one of the parts of IFS I find most clinically beautiful, is that the model says self is always there. It can't be damaged. No matter what's happened to you, self is intact. The work is not to build it, the work is to unblend it from the parts that have been blocking access to it. Pixar didn't quite name a self character, but there is an implicit one. Riley herself behind all the emotions, running the controls. The movie's healing arc is essentially Riley's emotions learning to work together rather than fight for the control panel, which is more or less what self-leadership looks like. So I want to do something with you for the next couple of minutes. Think of a part that's been giving you a hard time lately. It doesn't have to be a big one. The inner critic, the procrastinator, the avoidant one, the one that's harder on you than you'd ever been on a friend, whatever shows up first. Now, if you were to describe what's going on, you'd probably say something like, I'm being too hard on myself. I'm so anxious right now. I'm such a procrastinator. Notice the language. I am. I am that thing. Now try this. Replace I am with a part of me is. A part of me is being very hard on me right now. A part of me is anxious. A part of me is procrastinating. Did anything shift even just a little? Even just a half step, giving you a bit of breathing room between you and the part? That tiny linguistic move from I am to a part of me is doing something real. In IFS, it's called unblending. You're stepping out of being the part. You're noticing it. Some self just showed up. And here's what's important. You don't have to fight that part. You don't have to argue with it or push it down or talk yourself out of it. You just changed the relationship from being it to being with it. This is consistent with what current neuroscience shows about self-referential processing. When we shift from being immersed in a state to observing it, we're engaging different neural pathways, recruiting more prefrontal regulation regions and dampening the limbic activation. Now, staying with this part for just one more breath, see if you can ask it something. What are you trying to protect me from? Don't try to think of an answer. Just ask and see what surfaces. Whatever came up, or even if nothing came up, that question is the start of an actual relationship with this part. Fighting it, exiling it, asking what it's been doing for you. Most of us have spent decades trying to fight our parts off. This little thing we just did is a slightly different orientation. It's the beginning of working with them. So I want to be straight with you about the research because IFS is one of those modalities that has a much bigger cultural footprint than its evidence base. Here's where things stand as of this year. There are now 2 published randomized controlled trials of IFS, a 2013 study for rheumatoid arthritis and a brand new 2026 RCT of a group-based IFS protocol for PTSD called PARTS, conducted at a Harvard-affiliated medical center. A 2025 scoping review in clinical psychologists looked at 27 IFS studies and concluded IFS is a promising treatment, particularly useful for chronic pain, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. And the evidence base remains limited in scope. Both of those things are true at the same time. So what should you do with that? My honest read as a clinician, IFS describes something real about the inner world. The internal multiplicity it points to is well supported across 100 plus years of psychological theory. The recent PTSD trial is a meaningful inflection, and the formal evidence base is genuinely incomplete. It's promising. It's just not yet proven for everything practitioners use it for. I'd rather tell you that something is true and partial than something that's polished and oversold. What I can say with confidence is that the underlying idea that you're a system of parts and the parts have their own logic has been verified by every clinician I know who's ever worked with people in real depth. Whether the specific protocol is the best way to work with that, that's a more open question. And the data for that is being built right now. And one more honest thing. If you have a history of significant trauma or dissociation, parts work is something to do with a trained clinician, not solo on YouTube. The part of me shift is safe. Going deeper into the inner system, especially with younger wounded parts, is real psychotherapeutic territory and deserves real support. So here's where we are at in this series. Last week we named the problem, knowing isn't doing, the insight behavior gap. Pillar 1 of the framework was relational safety, that change happens in the context of real attuned relationship. This week was Pillar 2, internal multiplicity, the recognition that you're not one person trying to change, you're a system. And the parts of that system that look like resistance are usually the most loyal employees you've got, protecting something younger and more vulnerable than the part you reading self-help books or watching this video. Which means I want you to really hear this. When you can't seem to change something, the answer is almost never try harder. The answer is get curious about who inside of you is trying very hard to keep things exactly as they are and what they're protecting. You may have been trying to bully your parts into submission for years and it hasn't worked. What if it never was going to? What if the way out is actually a lot more like the ending of Inside Out, where it's not joy versus sadness anymore, but all of them together at the controls? Next week, we will cover Pillar 3. So even understanding your parts isn't enough because there's another whole layer of why we get stuck. And that layer doesn't live in language at all. It lives in the body. Next week, we're going to talk about the nervous system, the somatic dimension, and why your body knows what's safe before your brain has time to think about it. If something landed for you today, the question I'd love for you to sit with this week is this: what part of me is running the show right now? And what is it trying to protect? That's a real ongoing question, not one to solve in a day, just to start asking. My name is Dominic, and this has been MetaTherapy. I'll see you next time.